everybody? This is the Pop Music Freak. I am back with another countdown, continuation of the countdown of the top 100 songwriters of the Hot 100 era. We are a quarter of the way through. I'm going to do number 75 through number 51 in this video. Very interesting mix of great artists and great songwriters from all different time periods, from 1958 all the way up to today. I hope you enjoy what I'm doing here. Of course, please subscribe and share and like and all that good stuff. All right. Anyway, so where we left off, we're at number 75. Number 75 is Jon Bon Jovi, of course, from his group Bon Jovi. Basically wrote all of the hits that Bon Jovi recorded, plus a few songs that he recorded solo outside of the group. I'm going to give you the three song rundown of the three biggest hits on the Billboard charts that he has written. He wrote a total of 5 number 1 singles. The third biggest hit he wrote was the solo hit Blaze of Glory. Did it for a movie soundtrack back around 1991 or so. Forgot the name of the movie. Honestly, it was a pretty forgettable movie. But yeah, that was his third biggest hit. His second biggest hit he wrote for Bon Jovi was Living on a Prayer, which was his biggest number 1, going to number 1 for 4 weeks, early in 1987. Biggest hit he wrote, according to our point system, actually Always, their 1994 hit, actually earned more points. It only hit number 4 on the Hot 100, but it spent so much time on the chart, nearly a whole year, that it ended up ranked the biggest hit that Jon Bon Jovi has written. Okay, next we have number 74. It's DARYL SIMMONS. He is a songwriter that worked closely with Babyface back in the 90s, mostly. I'm going to tell you what the 3 biggest hits are that DARYL SIMMONS has written. Number 3 would be You Mean the World to Me by Toni Braxton from 1992. Second biggest hit was Baby 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 by TLC, also from 1992. And the number 1 song is also from that same year. End of the Road by Boyz II Men, the biggest hit of 1992, was written by DARYL SIMMONS. Pretty interesting accomplishment there, as 3 biggest hits were all from the same year. Okay, now we're up to number 73. It's John D. Loudermilk. Most younger people are saying, who? John D. Loudermilk. Who's that? Well, he was a big-time songwriter in the 1960s. He wrote for several different artists. I'm going to give you the rundown. The third biggest hit he wrote was a song called Waterloo by Stonewall Jackson. It was a big hit around 1962. The second biggest hit was Norman by Sue Thompson, which was a number 3 hit in 1962. The biggest hit he wrote, Indian Reservation, which was recorded by a few artists. The biggest hit was by Paul Revere and the Raiders in 1971, which hit number 1. So John D. Loudermilk is number 73 on the list. He wrote a lot of other hits, smaller hits for other artists, but he was very active in the 60s, and that explains his position here at number 73. Number 72, we have David Foster, who most of you know very well. For a very long time, he is an accomplished songwriter and producer, and worked with many, many artists and had a lot of hits. But the 3 biggest, number 3 is St. Elmo's Fire, Man in Motion by John Parr, hit number 1 in 1985. Second biggest hit written by David Foster, I Have Nothing by Whitney Houston from the Bodyguard soundtrack in 1992. And the biggest David Foster hit is Hard to Say I'm Sorry, originally recorded by Chicago in 1982. The group As Yet re-recorded it 1995, and just happened to bring in Peter Cetera to sing the final chorus. Pretty interesting to hear that on the radio. You hear your remakes, you're like, oh, another R&B remake of blah, 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 blah. And then all of a sudden you hear Peter Cetera sing. I'm like, all right, nice touch. They brought the original singer back. But yeah, biggest hit for David Foster was Hard to Say I'm Sorry. Now, we're up to number 71. Jeff Barry, a successful writer in the 60s and the 70s. He had number 1 hits, several number 1 hits. In fact, he wrote 7. The three biggest hits that he wrote or co-wrote, third biggest would be Do-Wah Diddy Diddy from Manfred Mann back in 1964. The second biggest hit was I Honestly Love You by Olivia Newton-John. Jeff Barry co-wrote it with Peter Allen. And the biggest hit he ever wrote was Sugar Sugar by the Archies, 1969. So that's Jeff Barry. Next, number 70, Cal Mann. Big-time songwriter in the 50s and early 60s. Third biggest hit he ever wrote was Mashed Potato Time by D.D. Sharp, 1962. Number 2 is Butterfly by Andy Williams from 1957. And the biggest hit Cal Mann ever wrote, Let Me Be Your Teddy Bear by Elvis Presley, 1957. Spent 7 weeks at number 1. So that's Cal Mann. Most of you never heard of him. I never heard of him either before compiling this countdown. All right, number 69, Bob Seger, the man, Detroit rocker. Yes, he wrote basically all of his hits. He wrote one other big hit for a friend in his band. I'm referring, of course, to the Eagles. Heartache Tonight from the Long Run album was the number 1 hit, and it's the third biggest hit ever written by Bob Seger. Number 2 on the list is Shakedown from 1987 from Beverly Hills Cop 2 soundtrack. And the biggest hit, according to our point system, Shame on the Moon, which he recorded on the Distance LP in late 1982, early 1983. Earned more points than Shakedown. It was peaked at number 2 for 4 straight weeks. Okay, number 68 is Neil Sedaka. Now what's interesting is he pretty much wrote all of his hits with his writing partner and friend Howard Greenfield. Howard Greenfield's number 67, but there is a slight difference in terms of songs that they wrote. Howard Greenfield wrote a couple of songs that Neil Sedaka didn't write, which put him slightly above in our rankings. For Neil Sedaka himself, his third biggest hit is Laughter in the Rain, his big comeback hit in 1975. Second biggest hit is Love Will Keep Us Together by the Captain and Tennille, also 1975, ended up being the number 1 song of the year. And number 1 on the list, Breaking Up Is Hard to Do, hit number 1 for him originally in 1962, and it was re-released late in 1975 in a slower version, much slower version, and that was a top 10 hit a second time. So if the combined points pushed it ahead of Love Will Keep Us Together for his biggest hit he wrote. Now, as for Howard Greenfield, he also was a co-writer on Love Will Keep Us Together for the Captain and Tennille, but he also wrote 2 number 1 hits for Connie Francis. We have Everybody's Somebody's Fool and My Heart Has a Mind of Its Own, both from 1960. So that's the difference. But Howard Greenfield wrote just about everything with Neil Sedaka. All right, number 66 is Rod Temperton. Some of you may wonder who. Well, Rod Temperton was a musician. He was a keyboardist for the band Heatwave that had disco, a couple of big disco hits, Boogie Nights and the Groove Line, and then also their ballad Always and Forever. But besides that, he also wrote a lot of stuff for artists affiliated with Quincy Jones in the 70s, namely Michael Jackson and James Ingram, mostly. So the third biggest hit Rod Temperton wrote was the number 1 hit, Baby Come to Me, by Patty Austin and James Ingram from 1983. Second biggest hit was actually Hey Lover from LL Cool J. Took a sample from some other songs that Rod Temperton had written. And the number 1 song that Rod Temperton wrote, Rock With You by Michael Jackson from Off the Wall from 1980. So Rod Temperton had his share of success, but it was kind of self-contained. It was only in a few year period, but his songs, can't be. They're huge records, so you gotta give him a lot of credit. All right. Anyway, so number 65 on my list is Ed Sheeran. Not surprisingly, he wrote most of his hits, just about all of his hits. His 3 biggest number 1 biggest hit was Shape of You, which spent 12 weeks at number 1. in 2017. Perfect was the second biggest hit, and Thinking Out Loud was his third biggest hit. So Ed Sheeran has some great success in a decade of success on the charts. All right, number 64, we have Jim Steinman. Yes, Meatloaf. Meatloaf indeed. Biggest hit Jim Steinman wrote was I'll Do Anything for Love by Meatloaf. And of course, he wrote the whole Bat Out of Hell LP, and he wrote some other big hits for some other big artists. Total Eclipse of the Heart by Bonnie Tyler was the second biggest hit that he wrote. And number 3 would be It's All Coming Back to Me Now by Celine Dion. But note that he also wrote Making Love Out of Nothing at All by Air Supply, which just missed number 3. It was number 4. And other big hits, Read 'Em and Weep for Barry Manilow, and basically everything that Meatloaf recorded. So he had a good run. Absolutely a good run for Jim Steinman. All right, number 63, Keith Richards. Yeah, guess what he wrote? Rolling Stones hits, yes. All the big ones. On our chart here, the third biggest is I Can't Get No Satisfaction, 1965's number 1 hit. Number 2 would be Honky Tonk Women from 1969. And the biggest hit, point-wise, is Start Me Up from 1981. It actually earned more points than all the other songs. Keith Richards had played a part in 8 number 1 songs. Now we'll hear from Mick Jagger pretty soon. And he basically teamed up with Keith Richards. They wrote everything together. So point-wise, they're pretty similar. But Mick Jagger had a few solo hits that he wrote. That'll be the difference when we get to him. All right. Number 62, Benny Blanco. One of those songwriters that has written a lot of stuff over the last 10 to 15 years. Never sang any of it, but he actually did record, but he didn't have any really big hits. Excuse me. All right, so his top 3 anyway. Number 3 is Kesha's TikTok, which is the number 1 single of 2010. The second biggest hit is Love Yourself by Justin Bieber, which was big in 2016. And the biggest hit that Benny Blanco had a part of is Moves Like Jagger by Maroon 5 with Christina Aguilera, which he co-wrote with a couple other people. Their names slipped my mind, but they're in the countdown. All right, so Benny Blanco played a part in 9 number 1 hits. Now, number 61, an artist who, looking at the artist rankings, she's number 3 on the list. But on the songwriters ranking, she's down here at number 61. The reason is simple. Some of her hits were not written by her. But a huge chunk of her hits she wrote herself. So, of course, I'm talking about Mariah Carey. Her third biggest hit is Dream Lover from 1993. The second biggest hit she wrote is One Sweet Day. Her team up with the Boys to Men. And her biggest hit that she wrote was We Belong Together from 2005, which is the biggest hit of her career. She has written 18 number 1 hits, which is phenomenal. It's just a lot of the hits that weren't as big mostly were written by other people. So she only has credit for really the 18 number 1s and a couple of other songs. All right, number 60 is Bob Dylan. Yeah, when you think of great songwriters, Bob Dylan's name is mentioned. It always is, for good reason. All right, and actually looking at the chart success of the 3 biggest hits, only one of them was recorded by himself. Like a Rolling Stone is the 3rd biggest hit that he's written, and he recorded himself. Number 2 on the list is Blowin' in the Wind. The Peter, Paul, and Mary version has been the biggest hit of several. There were remakes. Stevie Wonder had a top 10 remake of it as well. And the biggest hit Bob Dylan has ever written is Mr. Tambourine Man, which hit number 1 for the Byrds in 1965. So there's Bob Dylan at number 60. Next, number 59, Lil Wayne. Lil Wayne. You'd be surprised the number of songs that he has written. A huge number of songs. In fact, he has the record for the most Hot 100 hits written by one person, or the person that's been involved in writing the most songs. 173 songs that have cracked the Hot 100 were written in part or In Whole by Lil Wayne. And here's the top 3 of them. Number 3 is In My Feelings from Drake, which hit number 1. Number 2 is Lollipop by Lil Wayne. He recorded himself. And the number 1 is Down by Jay Sean, which Lil Wayne wrote in 2010. That hit number 1. So Lil Wayne has written a total of 5 number 1 singles and 173 Hot 100 hits, which is an amazing number. Okay, next we're at number 58. It's DARYL Hall. Of course, is one half of Hall & Oates. He has written all of their hits and actually wrote a couple of songs that were hits for other artists, namely Paul Young, 1985, Every Time You Go Away, which Hall & Oates actually recorded on the Voices LP in 1980. Paul Young grabbed it and made a hit on his own. So that would be ranked at number 4 on DARYL Hall's list. Number 3 is Private Eyes from the title track from the 1981 album, which hit number 1. I Can't Go For That, No Can Do, which is also from the Private Eyes LP. And the biggest hit that he ever wrote was Man Eater from the H2O LP late in 1982. And DARYL Hall is responsible for 7 number 1 hits. All right. Number 57, Mick Jagger. There he is, the other half of the team. Wrote the same 3. His top 3 is the same as Keith Richards' top 3, which is pretty obvious. Mick Jagger's responsible for 8 number 1 hits. The reason he's ranked higher is he had a few solo hits, and he co-wrote State of Shock with the Jacksons, believe it or not. He does have credit for that song, so that pushed him a little bit further up the list. Okay, next, number 56, a legendary songwriter, Cynthia WEIL, who is part of many top 10 hits through the 60s, straight through to the 80s. She has been active and has had a lot of hits. Only 2 of them reached number 1, but she's responsible for a lot of great songs. Number 3 on her list would be Never Gonna Let You Go by Sergio Mendes, which was the Sergio Mendes big comeback hit in 1983. The second biggest hit is an all-time classic, You've Lost That Lovin' Feelin' from the Righteous Brothers. Of course, originally hit number 1 in 1965. Hall & Oates had a pretty successful remake of it in 1980 from the Voices LP. And it's been played on the radio more than just about any song in history. In fact, it still ranks in the top 4 on the all-time list for radio airplay, which is pretty good. Now, the biggest hit point-wise on the charts is Don't Know Much by Linda Ronstadt and Aaron Neville, which was from 1989. That's Cynthia WEIL's biggest chart success. All right, next, number 55, John Mellencamp. You all know his name. You all know his name. We know he was Cougar and then became Cougar Mellencamp and then shortened it back to Mellencamp, his real name. Had a great run of hits from 1979 straight through to the early 90s. Here's his top 3. Third biggest hit is ROCK in the USA from 1986. Second biggest hit, Jack and Diane from 1982. Number 1, Hurt So Good from 1982. And just had one number 1, Jack and Diane. All right, number 54, Jeff Lynne. Yes, the Jeff Lynne from ELO. Some of you may not be so familiar with himself. Didn't have much of a solo career, but he had pretty outstanding career with his band, Electric Light Orchestra. But what's funny about it is there's 2 songs that were not with ELO that are on the top 3 list, and one of them because of sampling or sounding a lot like another song, but I'll explain. The number 3 song on his list is Free Fallin' by Tom Petty. That he wrote on Tom Petty's album Full Moon Fever in 1989. The second biggest hit is ELO's Telephone Line. Spent a long time on the charts, spent more time than Don't Bring Me Down, which was the higher ranked hit. Don't Bring Me Down is number 4 on this list. And his number 1, I'll explain, but it's Stay With Me by Sam Smith. Why? Why is he getting songwriting credit on that? Because the melody is very, very similar to Free Fallin' by Tom Petty. And to save from lawsuits, Sam Smith decided to give a percentage of the songwriting credit to Jeff Lynne and Tom Petty. So that's what happened. So an actual point-wise, Stay With Me is the biggest hit. Written by Jeff Lynne. He wasn't in the room, though. But anyway. All right, next. We have number 52 and 53 are combined because they're two different people, but they teamed up. They're the songwriting team called STARGATE. Their names are difficult to pronounce, so forgive me if I butcher them. Tor ERIK Hermansen and Mikael Storlier Eriksson are the two writers, obviously European in background, but they've teamed up and written a lot of great pop songs, especially in the last 10 years. Number 3, the third biggest hit that they've written is Diamonds by Rihanna. Second biggest hit they wrote, they wrote it with several other people anyway, but it's Irreplaceable by Beyonce. And the biggest hit they ever wrote was Firework for Katy Perry. So yeah, they've worked with all the big stars of the last decade. And they are responsible for a grand total of 10 number one singles. So they're not a joke. they're big time. All right, my friends, final song, the final songwriter of this countdown, this part of the countdown, Jermaine Dupri, wrote 11 number one singles. So he's had amazing success over a course of probably 20 years at this point. Third biggest hit that he wrote was You Got It Bad for Usher. Second biggest hit is You Make Me Wanna by Usher. And the biggest hit he has written is We Belong Together by Mariah Carey, that he co-wrote with Mariah Carey. So he's had an amazing run. People know his name. He wrote for Janet Jackson and several other artists in the last 20 years. Maybe even closer to 30 years now. So that wraps up the first half of the songwriting countdown. The next few days I will record the next video for songwriters number 50 through 26. So keep an eye out for that. I'm going to definitely do a few more videos today. So I happen to be off from work. But after today, you won't see anything till probably Monday or Tuesday because I do have a day job. But anyway, thank you folks for watching. Please share, please like, please subscribe. Peace and love.